Hello, everyone, and welcome to Tech Talk with Sodhi, not just another entrepreneurship show. Well, here we don't just talk about innovations, we also talk about the journey, the sacrifices, and the untold stories behind the headlines. Well, today we have a pleasure of talking to Shielvonda Haith, a trailblazing Black woman entrepreneur and the founder of Brightpay, a health tech startup that's revolutionizing the way specialty providers manage payments, making healthcare more accessible and convenient for patients. Shielvonda, welcome to Tech Talk. It's an honor to have you here as a guest. Also, given that it's Women's History Month, it's really exciting to have you as our first guest.
Thank you for having me. Really excited to kick off Women's History Month, and I'm excited to be here. So appreciate the invite.
Really excited to have you here. So, I'll just dive straight into it and, kind of get the audience a feel of what the beginning was like, especially in the world of entrepreneurship, especially in tech, with the stats often stacked against people of color. What was the first obstacle you remember when embarking on this journey?
So this was my first startup. So I'm a first-time founder. However, I have been working in the startup space since about 2011. So I've worked for 4 other startups, and I've had the opportunity to work across different stages of startups, being super, super early up through working with startups that had kind of had their IPO and different founder types, different seasoned professionals. So when I went into launching my own startup, I did have some context and some understanding of at least what startup life was like. The challenge was that even with that point of reference, you kind of think, okay, well, I'm coming into it at least with some perspective and some understanding, which maybe my starting point might be a little different than a first-time founder who's never had any exposure to the startup ecosystem or tech ecosystem at all. The reality is that being a first-time founder is still being a first-time founder. So it's new, right? It's new. So the first challenge that I can remember just on concept alone is this disconnect of the idea that you want to have a startup, you have a great idea, you bring it to people that are in places to make decisions about whether to fund you or not. And the biggest misconception is that you want to launch a startup and that you can get capital and that you can gain access to capital very easily, especially on an idea. So that was probably the first challenge, was understanding that there may be some stories of people that are able to do that successfully. But for someone like myself, who was a first-time founder, who, to your point, is an underrepresented founder, as a female founder, as an African-American founder, who, while I graduated from good schools, didn't graduate from Harvard Business School, didn't graduate from Stanford. And so having the networks of individuals that have strong capital resources were not also readily available to me. So having a great idea didn't really mean immediate access to capital to be able to get $2 million to start your startup.
Right.
That didn't happen. And that was probably, I would say, honestly, the first challenge was realizing.
Yeah, that, especially when you did start with Brightpay, I think in the past 3 years since pandemic, it's been a very challenging space. The whole landscape has shifted in terms of the investor ecosystem as well. So a lot of investors who were investing early on in an ideation phase now needed an MVP or a market validation, right? So we all did see that kind of shift in that space. And still, entrepreneurship always comes with moments of doubts, uncertainty. But how do you stay motivated and navigate those challenges, especially as a female entrepreneur, an African American entrepreneur in this field that can be less than welcoming? So what advice do you have for others facing similar struggles? And firstly, how did you manage that?
I would say first thing is don't go at it alone, right? So that's really important, is no matter how optimistic you are, no matter how upbeat your personality is, it is hard, right? Like this is not an easy journey. I often say it's one of the absolute hardest things I've ever done. And funny story is that I have been in business school working full time while giving birth to one of my children in my first semester. And that was hard, right? That was hard. that was not nearly as hard as I would have imagined being a entrepreneur, specifically a startup founder and a tech founder. It's very challenging. And what makes it challenging is what I call it the startup founder roller coaster, because literally in a day, you can just kind of paint a picture of just kind of what makes it challenging. So you go after a customer you've been courting for, let's say. So first, let's start with you get a potential customer, not a customer, but like a really valid, qualified lead, right? Makes you happy because you're like, yes, this can be
Right.
a customer, right? And so you put a lot of energy into courting that customer, checking in with them, sending them the updates. You just spend that time cultivating that relationship. Okay. And so you put like 6-7 months in, you're getting conversations, you're getting your calls returned. So you're getting really excited. And let's say one day you get an email and they're like, oh, we really would love to move forward. So let's say that comes at like 8 o'clock in the morning and you're like, yay, we might have a customer. And then let's say like 11 o'clock, in the morning, you get another email that says capital that you thought you were going to get to be able to support you implementing that customer doesn't happen. And then you're like, oh, so then you kind of like, well, I might have a customer, but then the capital I thought I would have to be able to support implementing that customer doesn't happen. And so now you're down trying to figure out how you're going to support yourself implementing this customer if you get it. And then you find out the customer says, well, we want to move forward, but it's probably going to be sometime next year. Oh, so
Right.
all in a day. And so it's a roller coaster, right? Like I always say, what makes this job challenging is the ups and downs. And as a founder, needing to stay grounded and feeling the level of consistency. So you have to create emotional consistency for yourself through the ups and downs, because they can go good and then change overnight. They can go bad and then change in a matter of hours. And it truly is up and down, up and down. And so you have to be mentally just aware that it is a bit of a roller coaster. And so preparing yourself where you get good news, okay, it's good, but not becoming overly excited about it. And then the same thing with like bad news, not becoming overly excited about it. So that's what makes it hard and challenging. But I think what really helps is if you don't go at it alone. And what I mean by that is if you are a solo founder, it's always helpful to have co-founders, right? Like I'm lucky that I have a co-founder. You're always just co-founders are great because one, you balance each other out, right? Like my co-founder has a completely different skill set, a completely different energy level than I do.
Right.
It works because, I may be super intense about one aspect of the business. They may be a little bit more mild-mannered about that. And so it balances itself out. So I would say if you can manage to find yourself a co-founder that you trust, that you'll be friends with, or still, kind of like the business won't make or break the friendship or the relationship, that's a good co-founder. But I would say second to that is, aside from, if you can have a co-founder or not, the other big thing is don't do it alone. So have a circle of founders that you trust, but also that you make it a point to invest in those founder relationships, not because you can collaborate with each other, not because there's any type of leverage in terms of business opportunity, but because you're both going at the same type of journey and you both are going through the same types of ins and flows and you understand each other. You both can understand if a customer ghosts you, what that might mean for you. You both understand when you're trying to raise a round and it's taking longer than expected, you understand each other. You can have empathy for each other. You can have support for each other in a way that's meaningful because you're going through that same journey. And I think that's important. And I think it's important to create a founder circle for yourself that has founders at different stages. So like for me, I am very good at connecting with founders. Some founders that I'm friends with and I check on their business. I may refer them to an accelerator program that I have never met in person. There are a few that I hope to meet soon in person, but I've never met them in person. But we talk like we know each other, right? That like we've been friends for 20 years. They're founders that are here locally that I see, once or twice a month. I check on them. They know when I call. I'm checking. They're solo founders, so they know that like I'm checking on them to make sure they're okay, and vice versa. I have another founder that we're early stage, we're pre-seed. I've founded friends that are seed that have raised really large rounds, and so they're able to give me advice about how to think about my next round and how to start prepping for
Right.
that. I'm able to give advice to founders who are 1 year into their journey and what being in accelerators looks like, and how capital might look in terms of a raise when you're earlier stage versus pre-product versus post-product. So there's a lot of exchange of information that as founders we can give each other, and there's a lot of ways that we can support each other beyond capital. And it's really important. Tech questions. Sometimes you have solo founders that are non-technical founders, and they have a lot of questions about how do you get an MVP? What's the best way to do the prototype? Do you have any recommendations for this or that? Or I got designs, but then should I do this? So there's a lot of exchange of information that you can give each other in addition to support and understanding the journey. And so I just say, biggest advice I have to any founder is create a founder tribe for yourself that you are checking on each other. You're checking on them. They're checking on you, both socially to make sure you guys are keeping good mental states, but also checking in on you in terms of progress of your business and supporting each other and cheering each other on and exchanging information in the process.
Absolutely. I think this makes a lot of sense. Building a community really helps working towards anything that you're trying to achieve, because at the end, it's a goal for everybody individually as well. And it's a collective goal. Mostly, it's better to have more minds on one problem. And I've personally had this experience as well. When I tried to start this tech startup, it's very interesting to see this. So in terms of that you need inspiration. Sometimes you need to move forward. So have you had an inspiration or a role model, or do you think it's important to have a role model to succeed?
I don't know if that's me or if that is, I think it's, again, being a founder is very different than any other profession,
Right,
because I think
right.
in other professions, you can say, I have this mentor I want to strive to be like, or, this national figure that I want to kind of emulate myself after. But I think in being a founder, I'll be honest and say there are a number of, there's not necessarily like an individual where I'm like, oh, I want to be just like that founder. I think instead where my motivation comes from are I would say two different things. One are companies that I know that have maybe had some level of success that may not necessarily be in my specific industry, but maybe industry adjacent. And I say, wow, like I love what that company is doing. And I love how far they've come and how much they've grown, how much capital they've raised, how much revenue, or I loved their exit. And I'd like to be that type of company when I exit. I think more in those
Right.
terms and saying, I'd like to be like these types of companies that have exited. And I have kind of the companies that I mirror what our success pattern looks like off of. And then I would say the other thing that I do think about is because I have worked for a number of startups, there are pieces that I will say I've taken from each of the startups I've worked with. And so I do try to keep in mind like some of the best CEOs that I've worked under, or some of the best COOs that I've worked under. I think about their leadership and their leadership style and how they led our teams or how they led the workforce within that startup. And I think about that. And those are the things that I probably would say I probably emulate myself after more, or I say, hey, in my mind, if I'm thinking about a vision of success, it's okay, leadership wise, here are the CEOs of startups that I thought did it really well, that I thought really did a great job of leading people and had great characteristics and aspects of which I would like to borrow. But then from a organizational standpoint, I think about organizations that have had the types of exits that I've wanted to have or aspects of their exit. And, for example, everyone talks about, we all want to be Facebooks or Ubers, right? We all want to be Amazons. But I think about, especially in light of it being Women's Month, I think about Spanx, for example, and I think about the Spanx exit. And that was an exit, completely different industry, but one that I think about her company, and I think about the people that worked for her company when she exited, and how that looked. That would be, for example, the types of things that I would look at. So not necessarily the success and magnitude of the exit itself, which of course we want for our investors,
Right.
that return, but it's also the way that the exit occurred and how the people were taken care of. Very similar to PayPal as well. That's another big story of how people exited successfully from PayPal and were able to go and then do their things. And so I think more in those terms versus in individual terms.
Right. This is truly inspiring to hear from you and the kind of drive and determination you've had. Can you tell us more about Brightpay? I mean, what gap did you see in the healthcare payment ecosystem, and how does Brightpay address this?
At the end of the day, our top line mission is to empower 10 million people with the resources that they need to be able to make really informed decisions about their healthcare and financial decisions at that. So the gap that we saw was really about information. Whether you're insured or uninsured, one of the biggest things that we find in the healthcare industry in the US is lack of information, lack of price transparency, and all of that leading to access to care issues. Whether that's someone has insurance, but because of their deductibles, because of their out-of-pocket expenses, because of all of the little nuances within their plan, they know that they're going to have to pay something. They don't know what they're going to have to pay when they go to see that doctor. So therefore, they choose not to see that doctor. And the type of downstream impact that ultimately will have on their health is tremendous. But then if we take that a bit further and we look at the uninsured, it's even worse, because everything that an uninsured individual is going to incur is going to be out of pocket. They're going to pay for every single dollar of every single service themselves. And so when we look at that, that means that you don't really go to the doctor unless you absolutely have to. But at the time you realize that you absolutely have to go to the doctor, it's probably a much more serious issue than you think. And not just the cost impact of that, but the health impact as well is going to be significant. And so where we really saw the gap was in people really understanding the cost of their healthcare, whether they were insured or not. Do you really understand the cost of healthcare? Are you empowered with the tools that you need to not only unpack that cost, but to understand it enough to make the right decisions about where you go for treatment, how frequently you go, and how you ultimately will pay for that. So that's one of the gaps that we saw. And so we really wanted to find a way to address that, whether that was through different payment model structures, whether that was through just simple information about how to even understand your insurance policy. There are a lot of opportunities in how we can close that gap, but ultimately we want people to feel like they have the information that they need and they feel empowered with, the tools to be able to own the decisions around where they go for care.
Understood. That's fascinating. I mean, it's pretty clear that it's not just a business, it's really a solution to a real world problem. And honestly, kudos to you and the team. But beyond the financial success, do you think that your business venture has impacted a bit of your community or just the broader landscape of entrepreneurship around you?
I do. I think that just by sheer nature of being a founder and being willing to not just share my story, but to be able to share resources with other aspiring founders and existing founders, future founders, I think is impactful to the community. So that's one thing is I absolutely do. And then I think the other thing is when I think about Brightpay and the work that we've done, we're still a very young company. We're 2.5 years old right now. We just launched our native app in January. We're already closing in on about 100 registered users on our platform. And one of the cool things that I love, anyone that deals with me and Brightpay understands, there are two things that I love more than anything when I talk about this company. It's one, talking about our doctors and just how wonderful our doctors are. And then two, talking about our patients and the impact that we have been able to make on the patients that we've had on our platform. So we have, and I mean, some of the cool stories that we get, there's people that are insured that are using our platform as well as uninsured individuals. And some of the stories that we're hearing, some of the impacts that we're making direct from the patients have to do with showing them what a different type of care can be. And so even though you're paying out of pocket for this, even though you're paying $150 a month extra for this type of care, when they actually get a doctor that spends 30 minutes or 45 minutes with them, it's different. It's different when the doctor proactively will text message you or will call you to say, hey, I recommended this supplement for you 2 weeks ago, and I want to see how you're doing. So I wanted to call you and check in on you. Do you feel better? Are you sleeping better? Right? That's different. I will also say when you have individuals that are saying, I'm able to find a doctor on your platform that relates to me, that understands me, that I can sit down with, and I don't feel like they're judging me or they have biases. Those are some of the stories that we hear, is the relatability of our providers, the way that our doctors are connecting with patients on an individual level, really getting to know them, and then giving them the care that they need. So some people need a little extra push to go get the test that they need. Or maybe you have the test, maybe you have a significant diagnosis, and you haven't had a doctor that is able to spend the time with you to, one, explain the diagnosis to you, and then number two, to really come up with a plan for you that they are proactively managing with you. So they say, hey, Karen, this is what you should do for this diagnosis. And 3 weeks later, they're proactively reaching out to you to see how you're doing, to check in with you, to see if they need to adjust your medications, to see if you went to that specialist that they referred you to. And so it is a different type of care, not just an affordable type of care, but it's a different type of care than what people are used to. And we're starting to see the impact on individuals. We're starting to hear not just a better patient experience, but we're starting to get feedback around certain types of conditions that are being managed better because you have a doctor that's actually taken the month or the 2 months to get to know you first, so that they can really look at your prescriptions. They can really look at your care plan or your treatment plan and figure out what will work for you, what won't work for you. So we're starting to get those stories in, and we're starting to see that impact. And those are the things that, quite frankly, that's why I do this job. That's why I'm so proud of our company, because we care about our doctors and we care about our patients. And we want our doctors to feel like they're in an environment where they can truly practice medicine, that they can practice it the way that they intended, which is to deliver care to their patients. And a lot of times in different types of payment models, they can't do that because they're so focused on the financial aspect of it that they can't really focus on the patient. And we remove that. We have a different type of environment. We have a different type of payment structure. And that different payment structure allows the doctors to really focus on treating the patients and delivering care the way they think is best, and then allows the patients to really receive the type of care that they should in the first place. And by focusing on prevention to begin with, by focusing on getting people in earlier and getting them comfortable with their doctors and getting them telling their doctors everything, right, means that we're going to uncover things sooner. We're going to catch things. We're going to diagnose at stage 1, stage 0 much sooner. We're going to be able to introduce interventions much sooner. And hopefully, our goal, save lives. I mean, at the end of the day, prevention and early detection saves lives. And people are putting off the care that they need because it's either not affordable or it's not accessible. And accessible means they can't find a doctor that they connect with, or they can't find a doctor that takes the time to listen to them to really understand what's wrong with them. And so in both of those scenarios, our mission is to change that. And yeah.
This is incredible. I mean, that's definitely a vision that we all can get behind, right? So And also, I think there is a challenge for a lot of people, even if they have the access, that idea of self care is also not there. So when you see that there is somebody, even your doctor, it's a great match, as in they really care about your health and they really check in with you. I think that idea of somehow that self care also gets validated, as in you do want to kind of do more for you. You see that there's someone working towards your health, with so much passions and so much diligence. I think that would enable a certain sense of self-care also for people who don't have it. The social impact that it has is absolutely incredible. I'm very impressed with what you're trying to achieve, what you have achieved, and what you're really aiming for. But for our listeners who are aspiring entrepreneurs, if you could have a conversation with your younger self, just starting out, what wisdom would you share? What would you wish you knew that you know now?
I would say, don't wait. Don't say, I'll do it in 2 years. I'll do it in 5 years. I'll do it in 10 years. When you think that you're ready, I think the best thing you can do to get ready is to jump into that journey. That's the first thing, is just, we really think that you want to jump into a startup. You want to stand up a tech product or company. I say go for it. I mean, it's going to be hard. It's going to be hard, and that's okay. But it's better that you go ahead and you do it when you have that sense of urgency and that fire in you, because so much can happen between the moment that you have the idea and years down the road that you may find yourself never doing it. And so if you feel like you want to do it, don't sit on it, number one, because also your idea may be great. But if you sit on it and you don't put it out there and you don't try, then 4 or 5 years later, you also might find yourself watching someone else launching the very idea that you had years ago. So that's one thing I would say would be, if you have the idea to do it, certainly take a stab at it. If you start down this journey and you don't see the type of success that you expect, keep going. Certainly listen to the market. So a couple of good starting points as you're getting off the ground are certainly build a prototype, a sketch, a framework, a deck that gets your concept kind of framed up. Put something on paper and get it out there so that you can get some feedback from the market very early to kind of know what direction you should go in before you even start to build. And then when you start to build, of course, build something that's a very low cost version of it, or a prototype version of a clickable prototype that, again, you can kind of vet and float out there. And that's usually, advice that people always give. And I believe that advice is very true. The other thing I will say along those same lines is, don't expect anyone to fund you in the beginning. Even if you get funded in the beginning, try to put a couple of your own dollars into it and show skin in the game, because if you're doing that, one, it shows yourself and others the level of commitment that you have to what you're doing. You're going to take it way more seriously. And then you're also going to be invested in trying to figure it out. So those are some of the starting points. I would also say get in front of customers early. That's kind of like a common thing that most people say, and you kind of hear it, but you don't really know what that means. And so what that meant for us and what I will genuinely say is, don't go after the biggest company in the market. Don't say, I'm going to sell to Walmart or I'm going to sell to Target and I'm going to go after those customers immediately. No. Figure out, if you're going to sell to a retail store, say, what family member do I know that owns a grocery store? And go to that family member, go to that friend and say, hey, so don't be afraid to do this. Don't be afraid to say, hey, I need you to do me a favor. I am starting this business. I am building this technology. This is a problem that I think is going to solve. What do you think about it? Can you play around with it? Can you test it for me? What do you like? What do you not like? And don't get them so much as to buy into the idea of being your customer, so much as get them to buy into the idea of telling you not even how good it is, but how bad it is. What you want them to do is tell you all the things and all the reasons why they wouldn't buy it, so that you can go back and then you can work through those things to make it something that ultimately will have them wow, I can't live without this. And you want to do that for 4 or 5 different people. And I say the easiest way to do it is to do it in your circle. You're not asking to be your customer. You're saying, basically break this for me. Tell me all the reasons it won't work or break it for me. And the other big thing I'll say is people often will say, we're building a product to, we're going to build this, we're going to do this. And really being clear on the problem that you're solving first before you build, because ultimately the first version of anything that you're building is not going to be your final version. You're not going to nail it the first time. Like, you're going to refine it. You may even fully pivot. You may pivot 2 or 3 times. And so the thing that you have to hold on to is, what is the ultimate problem that I'm trying to solve? And if you hold on to that, then you know that the solutions may change, and you're going to be okay with the solutions changing. You're going to be okay with maybe having to throw out an entire tech stack and start over. And when you have to do that, by the way, it's very painful, right? It's very painful to have beautiful technology that you built, that you invested quite a bit of money in, and then you have to throw it out and start all the way over from ground zero because it was the wrong product or the wrong solution for the problem or the customers you're solving. And so you can't be afraid to do that either. You have to be willing to say, there might be those moments where what I thought was going to solve the problem may not solve the problem. And so be willing to go back to the drawing board and be creative with other ways that you might be able to solve it. So those are some of the lessons learned for us, is just definitely be aware of your problem and be close to the problem too. That's the other thing. Like, I do think it's something to be said for solving a problem that's near and dear to you versus trying to solve a problem for someone else that you are disconnected from because you think that's going to make you money. Because that's the other thing that people don't realize about, is that there's a long period of time before you make money. There's a long period of time that can be before you're even paying yourself. And so you have to care about what you're doing so much and so deeply that you're going to continue the journey, even though you're not making any money, even though you're not able to pay yourself until. You got to believe in that mission. You got to believe in the problem that you're solving so much that you're willing to work at solving it, even if maybe there's not an immediate financial benefit. And so you got to make sure that you care about that problem. You got to make sure it's a problem that you're solving that really does relate to you. Maybe it's a family member, but you got to care about it. And I think that sometimes gets missed because everyone wants to build an app. Everyone wants to produce a platform. And I think there's sometimes a little bit of a disconnect between, we have an app, but what does that app do and who does that do it for? And why is it really important? Because it's not really about the app. The app is the solution to a problem. It's really about the problem you're solving for the people you're solving it for. So those are some of the things that maybe are common knowledge, some that are not, but it's going to take a while. And so really just understanding that the journey is a long journey. And so just being able to say, I'm going to keep going because I'm on a mission. And as a founder, like, that's the biggest thing, is what I would tell my younger self, is that it's not a sprint. You're not going to exit in 3 years. So
definitely a marathon. You're absolutely right. But then you really have to understand what are step-by-step challenges that you might be facing. So I really think rushing in and going for uncalculated risks is not a great way forward. But that's very insightful what you just said.
And I do have something to say about the risk too. That's a really good point as well, is that try to be as calculated as you can with the decisions that you make. But decision making is one of those tricky things too, right? Because when you do get capital, you have, especially if you go the VC route and you do get, investors, they expect for you to return them, right? They expect for you to demonstrate a return within a certain period of time, right? Pretty short period of time. So sometimes we can rush with haste to make decisions that are going to lead us to grow super fast in order to get them that return. And as I just said, you're not going to exit in 3 years, right? But we don't know that. And so we make decisions to hire really fast, right? So you get that first, $200,000 check or $500,000 check. And the very first thing we do is we rush to build our technology, really make it very sophisticated. You rush to hire like 10 people or 5 people and build up a team in order to grow really fast. And what can sometimes happen during that process is, to your point about risk, is that you don't realize the risk that you're putting the company in or yourself in when you do that for speed of growth before you have done some of the foundational things like validating the product in the market with that customer base. And the other thing too is, at the same time, you can be so reserved in making your decisions that you hold on to capital so tightly that when you do make decisions, either you're not necessarily spending so slowly, but you're not moving as fast as maybe you should to take advantage of your space in the market because you're trying to be so responsible and or reserved when it comes to spending capital. And ultimately, I would just say that, make your decisions very carefully, but be okay with the fact that you will make some bad decisions. You will inevitably hire a salesperson too early. You will probably pay too much for that business development person initially, and that might tank your runway, but that's okay. You might invest in a marketing company that gives you no return whatsoever, and you may spend half of your, investor capital trying to market to grow exponentially and growth hack it, and the return may not be there, and then you're out, $30,000 or $50,000 or $100,000 as a result. And so you would inevitably make some not so great decisions along the way. We all will do it. So part of it too is being okay with the fact that you do have to take risks sometimes in the decisions. Sometimes that risk will not result in the way that you think it will result. It may not kind of pan out the way that you hope. And then it turns out to be maybe not the best decision, but you have to be okay with that too. And at the same time, not be so caught up in making bad decisions that you don't make any decisions, right? So it's a fine balance between how much risk to take and then at the same time, kind of being a little bit more risk adverse in certain areas, right? But it's a balance. And in either case, you just have to be okay with the fact that you have to take some risk and it may result in good decisions. It may result in bad decisions, but in either case, it's all right. Just fall forward and lean into any failures so that the next time you don't make those same decisions or you vet them a little bit carefully or a little bit differently, but you won't know until you actually get there.
No risk, no reward, right? So the reward can be either that you succeeded in what you risked for, and either it'll be a learning that'll help you take a better risk the next time, or it's just always beneficial at the end. It's very enlightening, a conversation, Shielvonda. I know your story is a testament to what can be achieved with passion, with a purpose-driven mind. But before we wrap up, looking ahead, what are your biggest aspirations for your business and influence as an entrepreneur? And what has been your biggest personal takeaway from your entrepreneurial journey that our listeners can gain out of?
So for us, our biggest aspiration is, of course, to become a decacorn, right? There are not that many decacorns to begin with, and there are not that many founders of color that reach decacorn kind of $10 billion plus status, right? And so we seek to do that from a financial standpoint. From an impact standpoint, we say often we want to really impact 10 million people, and that's really our starting point, right? We want to be able to say that our company 5 years into the future had a true quantifiable impact on the lives of 10 million plus people, right? And want to be able to say very definitively how we did that in terms of the type of care that they received, in terms of our impact in preventing chronic diagnosis at later stages. So can we introduce early intervention and detection so much so that it changes the complete trajectory of someone's health, much less 10 million people? So that's what we look at is kind of our North Star, is being able to reach 10 million people and really impacting their lives in ways that we can very clearly articulate and demonstrate and show. And so that's what we want to do. And in the process of that, obviously having that financial kind of goal attached to it as well. As a founder, I want to see more founders coming into the healthcare space in particular. There is so much that can be done in healthcare. There's so many opportunities to reshape the US healthcare system, but also reshape healthcare internationally as well. And there's a lot of tie into, places where we can all serve each other if we just kind of had technology and different frameworks to be able to create connections, right, between those that provide care and those that need care. And so ultimately, seeing more founders tackling what is a very complicated space, especially seeing more founders that are from underrepresented communities, and not just racially underrepresented communities, but founders that are from socioeconomic communities that are underserved, founders that are coming from rural areas, founders that are coming from other countries that are having tremendous health issues and are in, near health crisis. How can we see those founders stand up solutions, tech solutions that will help benefit their communities? And so I hope that we can, over time, as we grow and as we begin to have more and more impact, that we're able to show other founders in other countries and other places that they too can have an impact on the health of their villages and the health of their communities, the health of their countries too. So as a founder, I hope that becomes encouraging and inspiring to start playing around with your ideas of the problems that you're having, and then think about how you might solve them. And then let's find a way for technology to kind of bridge that gap.
That's really inspiring, Shielvonda. I think that's a great vision to have for other founders, other entrepreneurs as well, because I think the world really needs it now. It's been so insightful. It's been so inspirational, talking to you about entrepreneurship, about your journey. This is exactly why this needs to start. So thanks a lot for joining us today. And it's honestly been a great conversation for me. Personally, I think it couldn't have been better. And thank you so much for giving your time to us.
Thank you for having me. It was a great conversation as well. And I'm looking forward to not just hearing this one, but I'm looking forward to hearing the other interviews that you do. I know this podcast is going to be very impactful. So I'm excited as well.
Yeah, likewise. And thank you, Shielvonda. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in for today's episode of Tech Talk with Sodhi. Shielvonda Haith's journey is a powerful reminder that no matter the odds, the determination and the clear vision, it's possible to make a significant impact. And I think the world should be moving towards that as well. And be sure to check out Brightpay. I'll leave the link on the description, and follow Shielvonda's continuing journey. And until next time, keep striving and keep breaking through those ceilings. Thank you so much.